Welcome to Transform, Tomorrow's Thinking Today. Real conversations on the innovation shaping businesses and our society.
Welcome back to Transform. My name is Asem Zabin, and today I'm here with Jessica Talisman to talk about all things from data, information, knowledge, intelligence, specifically in the infrastructure world. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
There is a comfortable assumption that you can point at AI and AI at your data and it will work the rest out. Today, I want to test the opposite, that without structure, AI doesn't reason, it guesses confidently. And in our world, confident guessing is rather dangerous. So, Jessica, from all your research, what is the most common way organizations get this wrong when they try to turn data into a decision?
Yeah, so I see this quite a bit where right now we're on the precipice where semantic layers is all the rage as an effort to try to inject meaning into data. So in most cases where organizations get this wrong is they think they can take their tables and rows within databases and just immediately manifest meaning from that data without machine and human readable labels, without definitions. So, just taking things as they are within the database and engineering complex SQL queries in order to try to create meaning does not exactly work for AI, for LLMs. So I see that collapse happen, but I also see the semantic layers as something that's coming forward that can help to get closer towards meaning and manifesting meaning within data. But still, even with semantic layers, you don't have relationships between things and you're still at a deficit of actual meaning because meaning lives in the relationship between things.
Right. I think what we're seeing in the infrastructure industry is we're drowning in information. In fact, data information is not necessarily the problem nowadays. I think it used to be probably a problem few decades ago, but nowadays what we used to focus on building the asset itself. So everybody gets excited about the new physical asset. So whether it's a bridge or a water treatment plant, everybody gets excited about looking at it. And nowadays, obviously, we get lots of information with it. So when you finish a new building or a bridge or a new structure, you don't only hand over the actual physical asset, you actually hand over a lot of information. You get drawings and just lots of PDFs and lots of information, which is again great news for everyone. I think the insight we need is always just out of reach when it matters the most. Why is that?
I see also the socio-technical component to this. And there's a huge gap between how we translate or understand or derive meaning from data. So especially within infrastructure and when you cross into physical spaces, that can be especially challenging because you can have a huge gap between how marketing and branding and those forces perceive of the data. And then you have the engineers and the subject matter experts, the scientists, and that understanding of what the same things mean can be wildly different. And so there's this gap between levels of understanding, but also the purpose, so the purpose of, data in the context of someone working in marketing, for example, is going to be wildly different than those that are engineers and scientists and subject matter experts.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. The infrastructure industry over the last, maybe more than a decade now, we have been doing really much better when it comes to information management. There has been some really, really good stuff, lots of emerging ways of doing things, lots of good ISO standards that have been emerging over the last decade, being updated. Industry starts to get it now about managing our information, the way we procure, collect, store, and manage information. We're getting better at it. We're not really there yet. However, probably in the most simplest, honest way to understand between the difference of managing information and managing knowledge in your own way, Jessica, how would you describe what's the difference between both of them, information management and managing knowledge?
Yeah, so information is a maturation of data. So it's like we have labels on things. We can identify, they have identifiers, there might be definitions, and there might be documents or content attached to that information. But to make knowledge, again, it requires meaning. But it also requires humans and humans in the loop, because ultimately humans own knowledge. So knowledge management is not new. It's a very old profession and discipline. I personally come from the library science domain, library and information science, and knowledge management's more than 3,000 years old and is iteratively built through many technological changes and innovations, from like the printing press to our digital systems. So knowledge management in and of itself is really much more about the discipline of organizing. And what I mean by that is that there are some basic principles for organizing, which includes the collection and elicitation of knowledge. As you know, it's because you're coalescing several different possible artifacts, data points, information, so things that are on further along on that maturity scale, and synthesizing those things to give meaning.
Yeah, beautiful. That makes perfect sense. Again, what we see here is the gap is very expensive. The knowledge is pretty much is in the brain still, and a lot of places that we go to. So there is 40 years of records that are still, like, you've got 40 years of records for this specific asset and still no idea how anything connects really. There are people who know how these things connect. You will find in the organization that this person has been working with us for the last 30, 40 years, and go and ask them, but they're about to retire. So please catch them before they retire, because they've got all of the knowledge about this water treatment plant or this building or this bridge or this road. So yeah, in our industry, that's still really the case. And that's where I believe knowledge management is going to be really key for us. Because like I said, it's getting really expensive. The shift now is trying to make as much as we can with the current assets versus building new. So we're getting a lot of pressure. Asset owners are getting a lot of pressure of doing more with what they have at the moment. But how can they do more if they don't know exactly what they have, or they can't access everything? So I find this very, very interesting. And like I said, if we don't deal with that, it's going to get really more expensive.
A big part of that is leadership and education of leadership. I can't cite exactly what the study was, but I've written about how I think it was a McKinsey study, that 89% of leaders don't even fundamentally understand AI, but then also what is entailed. Knowledge management has been the stepchild within organizations. Most organizations are lucky to have knowledge management at all. And so investment and upskilling and helping to build that muscle within organizations is not easy.
Yeah, I agree. Such a good segue. What we see also a lot of the time, and I really would like your perspective on this, is people think, so if we take all of these disconnected, poorly structured data and points a powerful AI model at it, and we believe it's going to solve everything because, hey, AI is here now, so just give it all of these documents, all of these systems, and it will solve it. What actually happens, Jessica, and why isn't what comes out the other end really reasoning?
Yes, there's several components to that, and one being that with LLMs there are two layers. So there's the parametric layer, which none of us really have access to. That's the training data. So like commercial AI models, they arrive and they already have been trained. So there's inherently bias introduced and understanding and meaning that's already sort of preformed. We point these LLMs at our own data, and those worlds don't necessarily match. There's also confusion, and this is the most basic layer, which is language. We seem to forget that these are large language models. And part of what I do is I build knowledge graphs and ontologies and taxonomies, which really deals with defining these things, but making them consumable, machine understandable. So it's also known as symbolic AI or good old fashioned AI, and often positioned as the antidote to generative AI, which is just probabilistic. So it's a pretty complex topic as in terms of why it doesn't work, but for the most part, you're dealing with what a model already knows, and then you're injecting your own data that may not be organized or well defined, and crossing your fingers and hoping for the best that automation will happen. But really, there's no grounding in the system. There's no grounding in the system that says this is our compass, and this is the map, so to speak, like the roadmap for our data, for our information, and so it requires structuring and work and defining and refining, which again goes hand in hand with information and knowledge management. And for lack of those muscles within organizations, there's this misnomer that somehow this automation is going to magically happen, that an LLM is just going to magically understand our data, because that's what's been sold and promised. I mean, that's part of the marketing engine of LLMs is that it'll solve all of your problems.
It's here. It's going to solve the problem. Absolutely. Trust in AI is such a big conversation as well. And it's one of the main reasons why some people are still hesitant, because it's like a black box that gives an answer but cannot show it's working. How do knowledge graphs or knowledge-driven systems change that?
Yeah, so I mean, you can't change the black box, but knowledge graphs do give a vector of control in constraining the world and the subject matter upon which an agent or LLMs can act. So it increases reliability and accuracy of queries and responses from LLMs, especially with workflows. So knowledge graphs can help to decrease token spend and can serve as memory. That's the other thing. Knowledge graphs are commonly used as memory, so that you can maintain some consistency with your LLMs over time. But the reduction in cost for tokens, I think, is one of the most attractive things to most companies, while at the same time, you hear people in the industry complain about how expensive knowledge graphs and ontologies are to build. Like any other data system, yes, building ontologies and knowledge graphs does cost money, but understanding that cost is an investment that's long-term, that actually has the return on investment in knowledge graphs will manifest or will present itself as a reduction in cost and tokens, increased accuracy, then it de-risks the business quite a bit because you're not dealing with hallucinations as much.
Yes.
So it's really sort of weighing the cost benefit holistically rather than just looking at the upfront cost of building something like a knowledge graph.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's such a good point. And speaking of risks, really, probably if we're being a bit blunt about the downside, really, what are the real risks of building AI on poorly structured or even disconnected data, especially in our world, really, where you're a construction company, or you're even a designer, a consultant, or the owner, like energy company or a municipality. What are the consequences that land in the physical world if we build AI on those poorly structured or disconnected data? Actually trusting it.
Yeah, I mean, the mistakes and the liability can be huge,
Yeah.
especially like there's certain things that ontologies can do. They can maintain provenance. When you build ontologies, each thing gets a unique identifier or a URI. So there's stability with this truly unique identifier that helps to reconcile clashing information or data. And so I think that's like a huge value proposition in that you can define and model data in such a way that you can maintain some stability over time. One of the biggest risks of not, structuring your data properly or describing your data properly is that the models can be very wrong. And delivering incorrect information comes at a huge liability with huge risks. One of the other things, and I'm just going to key off of something that you just said, is when you have like an energy company or these different entities that are interoperating or interacting or even part of a knowledge graph, is that ontologies, RDF ontologies, are interoperable. As long as it's an RDF, there's, depending on who you talk to, anywhere from 6 to 8 different formats that can be served in or be represented in. But at base, it's interoperable. And so you can share that reality across stakeholders. Even outside of a company, you can share like a fragment or part of the graph. But without that type of knowledge, it's very easy for LLMs to hallucinate, to give incorrect answers, to go down, or dated answers. I see that a lot where it's old information that somehow, populates and within workflows or within LLM representations. And so having that control now within infrastructure spaces, digital twins are very commonly used to help to manage sort of at scale that propensity towards misinformation, so that you have something that's a little lower risk because it's not in production, it's adjacent to, and you can use the digital twin as sort of like a checksum. You're able to check the information from an LLM and you're able to verify information in real time.
That's such a good point. I was literally about to ask you about digital twin. It's such a big topic again in our industry. However, a lot of the time, what you see, the result is an expensive 3D model. And I was literally going to ask you about what does a true digital twin look like? But I think you've already answered me, the one where reasoning, casualty, context are genuinely kind of baked in. That's such a way. I mean, I don't know if you want to follow up on that.
Well, and you're able to make sure that the information is correct and accurate at that point in time relative to your own system. So it gives you that luxury of sort of touching grass, so to speak, in your data to make sure are things in sync, are things represented as they should be. Obviously, there's other things at play, but it also allows you to model things into the future, which a lot of people don't really think about, and allows you to test things with low risk.
Yeah, very nice. I feel there's a lot of good side. Obviously, there's a lot of reasons why organizations should be doing this. From your point of view, what do you think is actually stopping organization from doing this well? When I say this, I mean building knowledge really well.
Organizations were presented with LLMs, and at that time, it was seen as a data problem. And a lot of that had to do with because scaling laws, right? Is at first when, LLMs, the idea was just more data, the better, the models will improve. And then basically LLMs consumed the internet. And it was learned throughout this time that when LLMs start to consume AI generated content, that LLMs degrade. So that changed the data song, which, paths towards discovery and figuring out what is the antidote to hallucinations and inaccuracies and all of the problems that are rife throughout LLM type applications. And knowledge is not inherently part of most organizations. And so most organizations continued as business as usual within their own organizational structures and didn't change their operating models to match the changing landscape and demands of LLMs. And I would argue that's still the case. And so, yeah, I do think giants are going to go down, are going to die, because changing with the industry and with the new research, and especially larger organizations are very bureaucratic organizations. The second part, again, goes back to leaders needing to be educated on this, because ultimately it's about funding. So if we just continue to fund these old ways, a lot of that involves vendor lock-in. And the one thing about knowledge graphs is RDF knowledge graphs, ontology-based knowledge graphs are open. They're free. There's no vendor lock-in. So you can spin up a knowledge graph for low cost, meaning that you don't have to buy a tool necessarily. Although, I prefer to buy a tool when I'm working in a large organization. There's still this really hard dependency on old ways of doing things. And this mindset that you buy the solution, not that you build and develop the muscle, but you buy the solution. And so we're just in this old habit of buying the solution, and that's just not panning out for most organizations.
So true. Yeah. I think if we want to bring it closer to way that someone can really relate to this, is there any example where relationship between things, not the data itself, change the outcome of a decision that you've seen that you can just point to and give us an example of, so that if someone is listening can actually be like, oh, wow, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I'll give you an example, and it's actually from pre-LLM days.
Okay.
The current commercial LLMs, although I've been working with transformer type technology since 2018. So we did use technically LLMs, I guess, or whatever the current version. But at Pluralsight, which is an ed tech company, we launched, and this is just an RDF taxonomy. So a lot of people don't realize that you can get started building a knowledge infrastructure, starting with SCOF's RDF taxonomies. Those are both standards. So you get a lot of the same benefits, not all of the benefits of ontologies. It's the same machine readable form. So we built a really strong taxonomy with some special classes, and we built an auto tagger, and our library at Pluralsight, we taught technology and product management and very technological things. We had more than 14,000 courses, and each course had multiple components, so it was a lot to track. The library was large, and obviously authors of these courses and instructors got paid. We were also partners with AWS as an example for EdTech. It was discovered machine learning was able to leverage that taxonomy to discover that we were overpaying instructors or authors to the tune of $5 billion over 5 years. And the symptom was you have a course that had been tagged, for example, or identified as being about Microsoft Azure. And another course was identified and tagged as being just about Azure. There was no relationship between those labels. There were, it turns out that there were 500 and some courses about Azure, 500 and some courses about Microsoft Azure, but they were talking about the same thing. So in many cases, authors were getting double paid if Azure and Microsoft Azure coexisted on the same piece of content within the database. And it was happening throughout. We were able, just this other team taking what I had built was able to leverage that to save the business $5 billion.
Wow.
So, it doesn't only have to do with LLMs. It's, also payables, account payables and certificates and licenses, and all of those things play into the larger ecosystem. And it has everything to do with the core understanding vocabulary.
Yeah. It's as simple as that. Again, if I bring it back to the world of information management, at least, there has been a lot of research and continues to be about the amount of time and how much it's expensive just looking for information, trying to find information. Really, it sounds very simple, but the amount of amount of time and then how expensive it is, 20% or 30%, I can't remember the research, of your time is lost on just trying to find the right information rather than doing something that actually adds values.
And that's an interesting thing that comes from library science that I've been thinking about quite a bit, is the whole orientation in library science is for the benefit of the user. Build for the benefit of the user, be it human or machine. So you're thinking of that first and foremost. And that informs your design and build because you're always thinking of how is a machine going to find this and understand what this is? How is a person going to find this and understand what this is? And that means that you're in service to others. And when you build in service to others, it, obviously becomes less about you and your team. It becomes more about the architecture and how you can inject meaning into that environment in order to help users find things.
That's right. What gives you the most optimism about where this shift is heading? If the listeners can take one idea into their work tomorrow morning, what should it be?
I think taking the time, I think most of us are pretty stressed. And like you said earlier, everyone, we're being asked to do more with less, with fewer resources. And so it starts as simply as an audit and figuring out what you have. So it's like everyone can have a role or a stake in this. Coming up with a simple controlled vocabulary. And that's not difficult. It's just something that takes time and support from leadership, but just that having an idea of what you have and how you describe things. Disambiguation, I think, is one of the biggest opportunities for people right now in organizations, and it is the biggest problem for LLMs. So, for example, I like, the example, and we have this very commonly in the English language, where you can have the same word mean different things. So you can have board, which is like a board, like a message board or whatever. You can have board like I'm bored. You can have board like a piece of wood. There's all these different meanings for the same words. And so, and then organizations, just because of the speed of business, tend to be, and business culture, tend to accumulate quite a bit of acronyms that we just expect others to understand outside of our own environment.
Yes.
Starting from that, like make meaning of those things, of the acronyms, reconcile your synonyms with preferred labels, start to create a glossary, like anything in any shape or form that can help to build meaning. And that will help you to understand what your estate looks like, because you can't model what you haven't defined. So before even starting on a journey of ontology, starting with labels and with taxonomy or controlled vocabularies or a glossary, just to start to make sense. And so when I say audit, I mean audit your language, audit your vocabulary. That is the surface. That is the interoperability surface. So part of what I just recently wrote about, in taxonomies all the way down, is how you find taxonomies throughout LLM architectures, throughout risk frameworks, throughout governance frameworks. Like taxonomies are throughout our entire digital ecosystem. And I think everyone can get a ton of improvement with LLM operations just by implementing it.
Beautiful. Absolutely. I think there's a lot of takeaways from this, and we can talk about this forever. I think one of the things is we owe our systems some structure before we ask them to be clever. Jessica, thank you very much for joining us today. This is Transform Tomorrow's Thinking Today. You can find us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcast, wherever you listen.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to Transform by GHD. Big ideas, real impact.